There comes a moment in every life when we look at ourselves and realize something is broken. It might be the weight of failure that crushes us, the loss that leaves us empty, or the quiet voice within that says we cannot go on as we are. In those moments, we stand at a crossroads. One path leads to despair, where we let the ruins define us and believe the story has ended. The other path leads to rebuilding, where we choose to rise from the very dust that tried to bury us. To rebuild is not to deny the pain, nor to erase the past, but to stand in the rubble with courage and declare that something greater can be made of this life. The brokenness you feel today is not a sign of defeat. It is a signal that change is possible, that the old must give way to the new, and that a stronger, truer self can be born. The invitation to rebuild is before you, not tomorrow, not someday, but now. And if you dare to take it, you will discover that your breaking point was never the end. It was the beginning of a greater story. The breaking point is never pleasant, yet it becomes the very place where the process of rebuilding begins. Many people spend their lives trying to avoid collapse, trying to mask the weakness of their own structures with smiles, possessions, or appearances, but when life presses too hard, the cracks reveal themselves. It may come through a sudden loss, a betrayal, a failure, or even the quiet emptiness of realizing that the path one has chosen is hollow. At that moment of breaking, the illusions are stripped away and the soul stands face to face with its own fragility. The temptation is to despair, to believe that the rubble defines us and that all is finished. Yet the truth is that the breaking point is not the end. It is the birthplace of rebuilding. Nothing new can be raised until the old is torn down, and the recognition of our ruins is the invitation to something greater. Think of a building that has suffered from years of neglect. The foundation has cracked, the walls lean, and though from a distance it may appear to stand, a storm reveals its instability. No wise builder would attempt to repair it by painting the walls or decorating the rooms. The structure must be brought down to its core before a new foundation can be laid. So it is with the human soul. As long as we cling to the outward appearances of strength, we deceive ourselves into thinking we are whole. The breaking point strips away the facade. It uncovers the truth about what is weak and what is false. This unveiling, though painful, is the first mercy in the rebuilding process, for it forces us to confront what we would rather ignore. At the breaking point, there is also an honesty that does not exist in moments of comfort. When everything is going well, we often excuse our habits, justify our choices, and overlook the silent cry within. But when the weight becomes unbearable and life shatters, the excuses fall flat. The breaking point reveals the truth of who we are without our masks. It is in that stark honesty that the possibility of transformation is born. For only the honest soul can be rebuilt. The one that continues to lie to itself will only keep patching cracks that will open again. There is a strange blessing hidden in being brought to the end of ourselves. When our strength fails, when our plans crumble, when we can no longer sustain the image of control, we find that we stand in a place where dependence becomes the only option. And it is precisely there that rebuilding begins. We realize that life is not rebuilt on pride or self-sufficiency, but on humility and surrender. To rebuild oneself is not to return to the way things were before the collapse, for that structure was already flawed. Instead, it is to allow something stronger, deeper, and truer to be raised in its place. The breaking point, then, is not simply a tragedy, but a turning. It is the threshold between ruin and renewal. It is the voice of life saying, "You cannot go on as you were, something new must begin." To reach that point is painful, yes, but it is also the evidence that we are still alive, that there is still a chance to rise, to learn, and to become what we were meant to be. In this way, the breaking point is not our destruction, it is our opportunity for resurrection. When we speak of rebuilding ourselves, the first instinct of many is to focus on outward change. People rush to alter appearances, to project new images, to achieve temporary goals that convince them they are moving forward. Yet the true work of rebuilding never begins on the surface, because what can be seen is only as strong as what lies beneath. The unseen foundation of the soul determines whether the structure of life will endure or collapse when pressure comes. To rebuild is not to repaint the walls, but to dig into the ground of the heart and lay something solid and lasting upon which the rest of life can stand. Every life rests on a foundation. Some build upon the approval of others, living for acceptance and praise. Others build upon wealth, power, or the fleeting securities of the world. These foundations may look firm for a season, but when storms arrive, and they always do, their weakness is exposed. Approval shifts, fortunes disappear, power fades, and what was once secure proves to be sand. Only those who rebuild upon a deeper, unchanging source discover a stability that does not fail. The inner foundation is not built from external achievements, but from character, truth, faith, and the strength that flows from the Spirit. The hidden foundation of a person is tested in times of trial. It is easy to appear unshaken when life is calm, just as a building looks sturdy on a sunny day. But when the winds rise, the rains beat down, and the floods press in, what is beneath becomes visible. If the foundation is shallow, cracks appear and the structure gives way. If the foundation is deep, the storms only prove its strength. That is why the work of rebuilding demands that we dig below the surface, past the layers of pride, fear, and pretense, until we reach the bedrock upon which true life can be built. There is also a danger in trying to rebuild without addressing the foundation. Many people want quick fixes. They want a new habit, a new resolution, a new appearance, but they do not want to face the deeper questions. What am I living for? What do I truly believe? Where do I place my trust when everything else falls away? Without answering these questions, rebuilding is shallow and temporary. A structure without foundation will rise quickly, but it will not stand. Real rebuilding takes time, patience, and the courage to confront what is hidden within. The inner foundation is not a matter of perfection, but of alignment. It is not about never failing, but about being anchored to something that endures beyond failure. To rebuild oneself means choosing to anchor life in what cannot be taken away. It is a choice to value integrity over appearance, truth over comfort, and faith over fear. It is the recognition that the strength of life does not come from without, but from within. A person with a firm inner foundation may be shaken, but they will not be destroyed. The unseen always determines the seen. Roots give life to the tree, though they are buried in the dark. A foundation holds the building, though it is invisible beneath the ground. In the same way, the unseen convictions, the quiet disciplines, and the hidden strength of the soul hold up the visible life. To rebuild oneself is to invest in that hidden place, to strengthen what no one applauds, and to lay stones in silence that will one day hold a tower against the storm. This is the path of rebuilding that endures. The greatest obstacle to rebuilding is often our own stubbornness. We cling to the fragments of our broken lives, trying to arrange them in a way that looks whole, convincing ourselves that with enough effort and determination we can restore what has been lost. Yet the truth is that real rebuilding cannot begin until we surrender our brokenness into hands greater than our own. Surrender does not mean weakness. It is the act of letting go of control that was never ours to begin with. It is the decision to place the shattered pieces of our lives into the hands of the one who can create beauty from ashes. In surrender, we admit that our strength has limits, that our wisdom has blind spots, and that our attempts at self-repair will never be enough to build something lasting. There is a strange paradox in surrender. The world tells us to fight harder, to push forward, to never give up control. Yet the soul discovers true freedom not in control, but in release. When a person yields their life, they do not fall into emptiness, they fall into strength. The one who surrenders discovers that they are not abandoned, but upheld. This is the mystery of rebuilding, that by giving up what we cannot fix, we receive what we could never build on our own. The act of surrender clears the rubble of pride, clears the stubborn walls of self-sufficiency, and opens space for something new to be laid within us. Consider how the soil must yield to the seed. If the earth resisted, the seed could never take root, could never grow, and could never bear fruit. But in surrendering to the seed, the earth becomes fruitful, abundant, and transformed. In the same way, the human heart becomes fertile ground when it yields itself. Surrender is not defeat, it is cooperation with the greater design. Those who resist remain barren, clinging to their emptiness, while those who yield see new life rise within them. Pain itself often becomes the instrument that drives us towards surrender. When the weight of failure presses upon us, when losses pile up and our own strength collapses, we are forced to admit that we cannot carry it alone. Many discover at that moment that what seemed like destruction was actually a doorway into rebuilding. By letting go, they find that the burden is lifted and that a new structure begins to take shape in their lives. It is in surrender that wounds are healed, that direction is restored, and that strength flows from beyond ourselves. The power of surrender is also found in trust. To yield is to trust that there is a greater architect who knows how to take broken stones and place them in a pattern we could not imagine. When we insist on control, we only rearrange the rubble. But when we surrender, the master builder begins to construct walls of strength, foundations of truth, and rooms filled with peace. What once seemed wasted becomes redeemed, and what once looked hopeless becomes a testimony of new life. Rebuilding is not about proving our power. It is about recognizing our limits and resting in a strength beyond them. The act of surrender may feel like loss, but it is the key that unlocks renewal. To surrender is to exchange weakness for strength, despair for hope, ruin for restoration. This is the unseen power that begins the true rebuilding of the soul. Pain is one of life's greatest teachers, though it is rarely welcomed. When we think of rebuilding ourselves, our first desire is to avoid suffering, to escape discomfort, to wish away every sharp edge that life presses against us. Yet, without pain, rebuilding would never be possible. Pain tears down illusions, exposes weaknesses, and forces us to see what we would rather hide. It is the chisel that shapes the stone, the fire that refines the metal, the storm that reveals the strength of the foundation. To rebuild oneself is to accept that pain has a role, not as a cruel punishment, but as a necessary element in the process of transformation. When pain enters our lives, we are tempted to resist it, to numb it, or to drown it out. But resistance often deepens the wound, and avoidance only delays the healing. Pain insists on being acknowledged because it carries within it a message. It tells us what is broken, what is missing, what must be changed. The H of loneliness reveals our need for connection. The sting of failure uncovers the cracks in our confidence. The heaviness of loss shows us the depth of our attachments. Pain, then, is not simply destruction, it is also revelation. It points us toward the areas of life that need rebuilding, guiding us to the very places where growth is most urgent. There is also a cleansing power in pain. Just as fire burns away impurities in gold, pain burns away illusions of self-sufficiency and strips us of false securities. Many discover in their deepest sorrows that the things they clung to for strength cannot hold them. The pain of loss unmasks the frailty of possessions. The pain of betrayal unmasks the limits of human approval. The pain of failure unmasks the fragility of pride. These painful revelations, though bitter, free us from living in deception. They open the way for rebuilding on a truer and stronger foundation. Pain also reshapes perspective. When a person suffers deeply, trivial concerns lose their grip. What once seemed urgent is revealed as unimportant, and what was ignored is shown to be essential. Pain clarifies what really matters, forcing us to let go of the excess and hold to what is lasting. In this sense, pain purifies the vision of the heart. It cuts away distraction and shallow desires, creating space for deeper purpose to emerge. Those who rebuild after pain often carry a wisdom that those untouched by suffering cannot know, because they have seen what remains when everything else is stripped away. Furthermore, pain has a mysterious power to strengthen. Muscles are built through strain and resistance, and character is built in the same way. The trials that seem unbearable at first create endurance, and endurance produces resilience. A person who has endured pain and chosen to rebuild does not remain fragile. They rise with a strength that cannot be taken away. Pain presses hard, but in pressing it awakens resources within us that we never knew existed. It is often in the crucible of suffering that courage is born, that faith becomes real, and that love becomes deeper. The role of pain, then, is not simply to wound, but to transform. It breaks what is false so that what is true can be raised. It empties us so that we can be filled with something greater. It humbles us so that we may be lifted in strength not our own. Pain is not the enemy of rebuilding. It is the very tool that makes rebuilding possible. Though it cuts, it also carves. Though it burns, it also purifies. Though it breaks, it also prepares the way for new creation within us. Rebuilding oneself is not an event, but a process, and at the heart of that process lies the discipline of renewal. Many desire transformation, yet shrink back from the consistent choices it requires. Renewal is not the sudden sweep of change that comes overnight, but the steady laying of brick upon brick, habit upon habit, thought upon thought. Just as a ruined structure cannot be restored in a day, the soul cannot be rebuilt without patience and discipline. Renewal demands intention, and intention requires daily effort. To rebuild, one must commit to walking a path where each step, however small, is guided by a vision of becoming whole again. Discipline in renewal begins in the mind. Thoughts shape actions, and actions shape life. If the mind continues to rehearse failure, dwell on fear, or feed on bitterness, no progress can be made. But if the mind is trained to think on truth, hope, and possibility, then every day becomes an opportunity for rebuilding. This discipline is not automatic. It requires deliberate practice. Just as a builder checks the alignment of every stone, so the soul must examine the direction of its thoughts. What we repeat in the mind eventually manifests in life. To rebuild, then, is to guard the inner dialogue, replacing despair with faith, replacing excuses with responsibility, replacing doubt with determination. The discipline of renewal also extends to habits. Habits are the quiet architects of character. What is done repeatedly forms the grooves of our being. To rebuild oneself means to let go of destructive habits that weaken the structure and replace them with life, giving ones that strengthen it. This is rarely easy, for the pull of the old is strong. Yet discipline means choosing again and again the practices that align with the new structure we seek to build. The habit of gratitude softens bitterness. The habit of integrity strengthens trust. The habit of perseverance anchors resilience. The habit of prayer or reflection centers the soul. Each habit is a stone laid in the unseen wall of the new self. Renewal also demands perseverance, because discipline is not proven in the easy days, but in the hard ones. There will be mornings when the weight of discouragement presses heavy, when progress feels invisible, when the temptation to abandon the process whispers loudly. In those moments, the discipline of renewal chooses to continue. It remembers that building is slow, that strength takes time, that beauty is born of endurance. The one who rebuilds must learn to embrace small victories, to celebrate every step forward, to believe that unseen progress is still progress. Discipline does not ask for perfection, it asks for persistence. The discipline of renewal is not merely about self-effort, but about aligning with a greater strength. Just as a builder follows a blueprint, the one who rebuilds must live in alignment with truth that transcends them. This alignment requires humility to accept guidance, courage to face correction, and faith to trust the process. Without discipline, the work of rebuilding collapses under the weight of inconsistency. With discipline, even the smallest beginnings grow into structures that endure. Renewal is a daily choice. It is the choice to rise when we fall, to continue when we are weary, to believe when doubt knocks at the door. It is the discipline of aligning our inner world with the vision of what we are becoming, until the outer life reflects the strength of that inner commitment. To rebuild oneself is to live in the rhythm of renewal, steadily, faithfully, until the structure of the soul stands strong again. When a person sets out to rebuild, the temptation is to long for what once was, to wish for the restoration of the old life, the old structure, the old sense of self that has been lost. Yet true rebuilding is never about going back. It is about moving forward into something greater. The vision of wholeness is not a return to a former state, but a transformation into the fullness of what we were meant to be. To rebuild is to rise not as a replica of the past, but as a creation refined, deepened, and strengthened through the very struggles that once seemed to break us. Wholeness does not mean perfection. It is not the absence of scars or the erasing of history. Rather, it is the integration of every part of life, the wounds, the lessons, the joys, the failures, into a unified strength. A rebuilt soul carries its scars not as marks of shame, but as signs of healing, evidence that brokenness was not the final word. The vision of wholeness sees pain not as wasted, but as redeemed, sees mistakes not as disqualifications, but as stepping stones, sees losses not as ends, but as openings into deeper understanding. It is this vision that guides the work of rebuilding, for without it, one may lose heart in the slow and difficult process. The vision of wholeness also requires imagination. It asks us to see beyond the rubble, beyond the dust of what has fallen, and to picture a life that is stronger, wiser, and freer than before. Many falter because they fix their eyes only on what has been lost. But to rebuild, one must dare to envision what can be gained. Just as an architect sees in empty land the outline of a future structure, so the soul must see in its brokenness the possibility of a greater self yet to come. This vision does not deny the ruins. It looks at them and declares that something beautiful can rise from them. Wholeness is also about harmony. It is the alignment of the inner and the outer, the visible and the invisible, the private and the public self. So often people live fractured lives, divided between who they are and who they pretend to be, between what they believe and what they practice. To rebuild oneself is to bring these fragments together so that the life within and the life without are united in integrity. This harmony is the strength of wholeness, for a divided life will always be fragile. But a unified life can withstand storms. There is a deep peace that comes with this vision. Wholeness does not mean a life free from struggle, but it means a life no longer defined by struggle. It is the ability to face trials without collapsing, to endure pain without being consumed, to stand in truth without wavering. It is the discovery that nothing outside has the power to undo what has been established within. When a person reaches this place, they no longer live in reaction to circumstances, but in response to purpose. The vision of wholeness is the ultimate aim of rebuilding. It is not simply survival, not simply patching up what is broken, but rising into a life that is more authentic, more resilient, and more at peace. To rebuild oneself is to believe that what lies ahead is not merely a repetition of what has been, but the unveiling of what was always possible. waiting to be revealed through the journey of breaking and remaking. Rebuilding yourself is not about erasing the past or pretending the breaking never happened. It is about finding the courage to stand among the ruins and choose to rise again. It begins at the breaking point where honesty strips away every mask. It deepens with the laying of a true inner foundation. It finds strength through surrender. It allows pain to carve and purify. It requires the daily discipline of renewal. And it lifts our eyes toward the vision of wholeness that transforms scars into testimonies of healing. The journey is not easy, yet it is sacred, because every brick of struggle, every stone of perseverance, and every pillar of faith builds a structure that no storm can destroy. So I say to you today, do not despise your broken places, for they are the starting ground of your rebuilding. Do not fear surrender, for it opens the door to strength beyond your own. Do not resist pain, for it refines you. Do not neglect discipline, for it steadies you. And do not lose sight of the vision of wholeness, for it is the promise that your story is not over, and your future is greater than your past. Thank you for walking with me through this message. I wish you courage as you begin your rebuilding, faith as you endure the process, and joy as you rise into the fullness of who you were meant to be. May strength guide your steps, may hope anchor your heart, and may peace crown your journey. Good luck and thank you.